pure experiences.
Welcome to the Pure Experiences Podcasts.
Number 52. Progress in Spiritual Search. Maharaj is always ready to deal with the doubts and difficulties of the seekers. He wants them to ask questions. He keeps telling specifically the overseas visitors that since they have spent considerable amount of money and taken a lot of trouble in coming to India to meet him, they should not waste their time sitting silently, but should ask him relevant questions. If you really have no questions to ask, he says, it means that you have already had the apperception of truth. Why waste your time? Why don't you go home? If, on the other hand, there is some area of inquiry which is not quite clear, clarification should be obtained right here and now. But he warns, do not ask questions as a human being centered in a phenomenal object. Remember, I am not talking to individual entities, but as consciousness to consciousness about consciousness. One of the foreign visitors who had been coming to Maharaj for quite some time began quietly. Perhaps I am speaking from a body-mind identity, but there is a question, a problem, which has been troubling me for so long that I cannot keep it bottled up any longer. I have talked about it to some of the seekers here, and I know that they too have the same problem. However, now I am not speaking for them, but only for myself. The problem is, how am I to know if there is any progress in my spiritual search? Occasionally, particularly during meditation, I do have a glimpse of what I am searching for. But only a glimpse, and that too only on rare occasions. How am I to know if I am progressing? Maharaj understood the sincerity and earnestness with which the visitor had asked the question, but in spite of his sympathy for the questioner, he could not conceal the frustration he felt. He sat still for some time, perhaps to get over the combined enervating effect of his illness and the mental anguish at being asked the question. Then he began speaking softly, more in sorrow than in anger. I think I should stop talking altogether and put up a notice to that effect. I find that many of you come here as a matter of habit or for a new experience which your friends have mentioned to you. You don't really listen. If you did, such a question should not arise. And if at all it did, you could have easily dealt with it yourself. In case you had listened to me attentively and understood what I had been saying, instead, I find that this question does disturb many of you. The problem apparently is about progress. Now, who is to make the progress? And progress towards what? I have said this repeatedly and untiringly that you are the conscious presence, the animating consciousness, which gives sentience to phenomenal objects, that you are not a phenomenal object, which is merely an appearance in the consciousness of those who perceive it. How can an appearance make any progress towards any objective? Now, instead of letting this basic apperception impregnate your very being, what you do is to accept it merely as an ideological thesis and ask the question, how can a conceptual appearance know whether it is making any conceptual progress towards its conceptual liberation? Maharaj took a matchbox in his hand and held it up. He asked, is this you? Of course not. Does it need time to understand this? A perception of this fact is immediate, is it not? Why then should it take time to perceive that you are not the phenomenal object called the body-mind? Remember, you are the animating consciousness that gives sentience to the phenomenal objects. Please understand, said Maharaj, that a perception is prior to the arrival of consciousness, which is the basis of intellect. A perception is not a matter of gradual practice. It can only happen by itself instantaneously. There are no stages in which deliberate progress is made. There is no when to make any progress. Perhaps one wonders, could it be that the surest sign of progress, if one cannot give up the concept, is a total lack of concern about progress and an utter absence of anxiety about anything like liberation, a sort of hollowness in one's being, a kind of looseness, an unvolitional surrender to whatever might happen. Here ends the number 52, Progress in Spiritual Search. Now this is a big matter for the spiritual seekers, as everyone knows. Everybody is trying to progress in their spiritual path. And one such visitor among millions asked this question, how will I know that I am progressing? And from the point of view of Maharaj, this is a nonsense question. There is I in the question. There is time in the question. And there is how in the question, the mechanism, intellectual process, the how. And the question itself says a lot, that the seeker has not grasped any of his teachings. He keeps on saying the same thing again and again and again. You must have noticed that there is no I. The essence of whatever appears is intemporal, timeless, eternal, non-local, pure awareness, like empty space. Where is it going to progress? And from where is it coming? What can the zero become? In what can the nothingness turn into? And since it is being manifested as everything, the whole existence, billions and billions of universes of different kinds, what else it needs to become? What else is not there? That is your essence. Who else needs to progress? Who else is there to progress? That which appears, this body-mind, even if it progresses, it will disappear. The body is progressing to grave. The body is a self-organizing system. It remains for a while, and then this pile of organic matter, it rots away to its basic substances. This mind, an accumulation of thoughts, feelings and emotions, rots away. That is where they are progressing. If you look directly with your direct experience, that is what is happening to them. That which you really are is absolutely perfect, is already infinite. So probably these words are just words for many people, and they are so entangled in this old, not old, it is very modern actually, concept of progress on the spiritual path. The path is pathless path. The door is doorless door. And the knowing is instantaneous. It is equal to not knowing. The realization is, I am already that. It is not becoming something. So he is kind of not pleased, because a guru is sitting there in spite of his poverty, his bad health, his this communication gap of language barriers and so on, sits there every day, day after day, hours after hours, telling one thing, repeating it many possible ways, and this is the result. So obviously the guru is going to be a little bit disappointed. And then he gives a very pithy example of matchbox. Look at the matchbox. Is it you? And how much time it took to know that no, it is not me, it is only an appearance, it is an experience. And then where are you progressing for knowing that the body-mind is not you? How much progress do you need? How much time, how many years do you need to see that the body-mind is also an appearance, it is also experience that is appearing. It's not me. So this is the problem of progress. On the path of knowledge, there is no progress. It is, you can say, kind of regression, coming back to my own essence. It is a return, coming back home. You were gone somewhere and you were lost. Now the Guru simply shows the light like a lighthouse and you instantly are back. If the realization is taking time, then it is not a realization. If you don't know your true nature right now, right here, that which is consciousness, then you are probably searching for something else. This self-realization is not your business. Then that's why you go from door to door, pillar to pole, to look for that which you are searching. And then probably you are not searching for your essence. As long as there is a seeker, the search will never end. So according to my experience, it is understandable because I was like that. I was extroverted. I was looking outside somewhere that I'll get an experience one day which will tell me what I am. And this is the stupidity of the highest kind. Why highest? Because a spiritual seeker is supposed to be very high on the ladder of evolution. So it is not that my teachers never pointed this out, that look, you are the one whom you are searching for. The one who is looking is your true nature, not the experience, the experiencer, the subject, the pure subjectivity. So they repeated it many, many times actually. But since it has to go through all the filters of the mind, it never got into it. The mind cannot let it enter. It has some kind of resistance. It will also always look for outside somewhere. And as we know why people are running like mad for spiritual attainments, for self-realization, for whatever, to become one with everything. And after being told that, look, this is the case, you cannot progress, then the mind cannot accept it. It wants to progress. It wants to become something. So there have been many traditions that deal with this kind of mind by offering a progressive path. Those paths are actually more popular, you can see. Path of knowledge, well, hardly anybody knows the name also. Or they know the name and they think it is about reading books and debating and very, very thick philosophy, dry mental games. They think that is path of knowledge. On the path of knowledge, there is no knowledge and there is no path. This is the funny thing about it. It is the direct path. There is no path here. So even after telling that, no, look, you are looking in the wrong direction, look here, look within. And if still the person or that mind is unable to grasp it, he is prescribed the other paths. Okay, you want to progress? Okay, take a progressive path. Keep progressing till that is exhausted. And people progress a lot. I've seen they progress a lot. And the progress has been on the surface. And they think that performing the religious duties or ethical conduct or even wearing a set of, the ornaments, specific kinds of robes and a long beard, they think that is the sign of progress. Talking in a loose manner and all this love and light, fluffy unicorn stuff, they think that is spiritual progress. It is very, very shallow. It is again a drama of the mind. It sticks to the worldly things. Anything that is about progress and doing is worldly. It is as if there is some kind of race. How good can I become? How spiritual can I become? And even if you become the best, it will disappear one day. It can disappear today also. Next second will be the last second of this body-mind, the best body-mind. Now, where is the progress? What kind of achievement is this? So, at least on the path of knowledge, the first thing that comes is the self-realization. That is the first step, the baby step. It is the biggest step for mankind. After that, there is a little bit of cleanup to do because the mind is shattered. Everything has fallen down. So There are some questions that the mind keeps asking, and the guru will keep repeating, look, these questions are okay, but look at the mind. It is in confusion because it cannot know. In the traditional way, it used to know things. It cannot search in a traditional way, in its habitual way. It cannot find things out there in the world, and it is trying to compete with others to get the spiritual stuff, just like it competes with people to get more and more food and mates. So it is doing the same thing for spiritual things also. So this is the job of the guru, to clean up these things. So you can say that the cultivation happens after the realization happens. There is some kind of cutting down, unlearning in this cultivation. Although it is called cultivation, it may be taken as to, can be confused with growth of some kind, spiritual growth, cultivation. It is not growth, it is cutting down. So whatever is left is very pure, obviously. So that shows up in the mind, in the speech, in the body, in the behavior. That's why probably people think that, okay, they are growing somewhere. You can say that, but no, the ego has been reducing. If you want, you can call that spiritual growth. You can call that as progress. Ultimately, that is also of no use, because that which is ultimate is already very, very pure. It is like drawing a line on the water. As long as it's being drawn, it stays, otherwise it's gone. It is so pure. So as long as there is this mind, body and manifestation, you can call them impurities, but it's not really impurity. What will you call the line on the water? Is it a distortion? Is it a defect? Whether the water has become something else? No. So this all cultivation thing is also an illusion. It is a falling away of the mind. Now the unfortunate thing is that people call it progress. And they think that I am making progress. The I is still there. So it is not a progress, it is a regress. Even if you are on the progressive path, if your guru has not introduced you to yourself, then there is no hope. Then you will keep progressing forever. It's infinite. Good luck. So Maharaj says, there are no stages in which deliberate progress is made. There is no one to make any progress. And then he says that, okay, if you cannot give up this concept of progress, then look at it from this point of view. What are the signs of progress? And he says, utter absence of anxiety about anything like liberation. When this drops away, there's no more desire to get liberated. There's no more desire to progress further. When this is dropped, you can say it is progress. And then he says, lack of hollowness in one's being. Like this question is hanging on your head, like, who am I? Hardly any progress has been made. And you're not even initiated, that means. Because not knowing who am I gives rise to this hollowness, sense of being incomplete. So if that is gone, if you see yourself as whole and complete, perfect, then you can say it is progress. And then he says, a kind of looseness, and probably he means a carefree attitude, being happy and free. These are signs of already liberated person. A person who is making progress is not obviously happy and free. He's bound by his own seeking, and the unhappiness is that I'm not progressing, or I need to progress a lot for many, many years, many lifetimes, so on. Or everybody else is progressing except me. Or I don't have a proper guru. He keeps telling me this mumbo jumbo, you are not the self and all. So if there is unhappiness and there is bondage, sense of limitedness, then you can say no progress there. And then he says unvolitional surrender. That is a natural kind of surrender that happens. There is no longer a desire to manipulate or control. The first thing that is lost is the bad habits, obviously. Lying, deceit, violence, hate, these things, they are dropped because it is seen totally unnecessary. And then the good things are also dropped. The desire to do good, the desire to teach others, the desire to do something good, if not for me, for somebody else. This means a little bit of ignorance is still there if these desires, if these activities are there. Just like there is no I, there is no you also. Whom are you going to teach? So many people go through this, and you see Maharaj is also doing it. So we are in a grey area here, but ultimately that also is dropped. You can say that if somebody comes to you and asks a question and then something spontaneously comes out of your mouth, something which can help that person, and actually I've seen nothing helpful comes out of a guru's mouth. It always looks like salt on a wound. The talk of a guru is very painful for an ignorant person. The one who has realized it looks like honey, but there's nothing to help. Those who can be helped, they get the help on the first day. Those who cannot be helped, well, they are not going to like it. Whatever you're going to say, they won't like it. So it is only a spontaneous occurrence that yes, somebody came and asked something, so the person told something about his experiences, what he thinks and all. And now he's not concerned with whether the seeker or visitor got benefited or not. So out of their compassion, the guru says something. It is not a project. It is not a mission to enlighten everybody. So once this last desire is also to do good for everyone is also dropped, then nothing remains there. Then there is this pure awareness that is shining. So there are a few more articles there which are worth reading, but I'm going to skip because mostly repetition of what is already said. And I'll skip to the Appendix 1, where Balsekar has given the core of the teaching. The core of Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj's teaching is the knowledge of one's own true identity. This knowledge is indeed the pivotal point around which moves everything. It is the crucial truth. And the perception of this truth arises only from intense personal experience, not from a study of religious text, which, according to Maharaj, are nothing but hearsay. Taking his stand on the bedrock of incontrovertible facts and totally discarding all assumptions and speculations, he often addresses a new visitor in the following words. You are sitting there, I am sitting here, and there is the world outside. And for the moment, we may assume that there must be a creator. Let us say God. These 3-4 items are facts or experience, not hearsay. Let us confine our conversation to these items only. This basis automatically excludes, along with the hearsay, the traditional texts too. And therefore, there is always an exhilarating sense of freshness and freedom to Maharaj's talks. His words need no support from someone else's words or experiences, which after all is all that the traditional texts can mean. This approach completely disarms those educated people who come to impress the other visitors with their learning, and at the same time hope to get a certificate from Maharaj about their own highly evolved state. At the same time, it greatly encourages the genuine seeker who would prefer to start from scratch. On this basis, a visitor usually finds himself without too many questions because all his pre-planned questions generally happen to be based on hearsay. Maharaj usually helps such a visitor by prompting a query such as, what is it without which no one would be able to perceive anything or do anything, without which you would not be able to ask any questions, and I would not be able to answer. If you and I were not conscious, would we have had this conversation? What is consciousness? Is it not the sense of being present, being alive? This sense of conscious presence does not really have reference to any individual being present. It is sense of conscious presence as such. Without this consciousness, when, for instance, consciousness leaves the body at death, the body is quickly discarded, buried or cremated, because otherwise in no time the putrefied flesh would start stinking. Where then is the individual who, when consciousness was there, might have been considered a genius? He is said to have died. Consciousness, the basis of all manifestation. Maharaj tells the visitor that it is only about this consciousness or I amness that he always talks. Any inquiries about anything else would be useless because this consciousness must be there before anything else can be. If I am not conscious, he says, the world is not, as in deep sleep. It is only when I am conscious that the world exists for me. All inquiries of the seeker, Maharaj asserts, must therefore relate to this consciousness. How did it arise? What is its source? What sustains it? What is its nature? The answer to these queries lead to true knowledge. Without consciousness, there can be no phenomenal existence, and therefore consciousness is the highest God that an individual in his individuality can conceive, although he may give it a name, Krishna, Ishvara, Shiva, Christ, etc. When consciousness leaves the body, there is no individual, no world, no God. The relationship between the physical body and consciousness, says Maharaj, must be very clearly perceived. Consciousness can be conscious of itself only so long as it has manifested itself in a phenomenal form, a body, whether it is that of an insect, a worm, or an animal, or a human being. Without the body in unmanifested state, consciousness is not conscious of itself. Without consciousness, the body is merely dead material. The body, therefore, says Maharaj, is the food that sustains consciousness and the instrument through which consciousness functions. In fact, he says, consciousness is the nature or suchness or taste of the physical body, like sweetness is of the sugar. The essential purpose of Paramarth. Maharaj constantly urges us not to miss, forget, overlook or ignore the essential purpose of all Paramarth. That is the ultimate understanding, and to know our Swarup, that is our true identity. What is our true identity? Maharaj would say, unmanifested, in stillness. Our identity is the absolute unicity, pure awareness, not aware of itself. Manifested, functioning in duality, our identity is consciousness, seeking itself as the other, because it cannot tolerate its own presence. In other words, says Maharaj, on our original state of the timeless, changeless, absolute non-nominality, the body come consciousness has appeared like a temporary illness without cause or reason, as part of the total functioning of the impersonal consciousness in its role as pragya. Each phenomenal form works out its allotted duration, and at the end of its lifespan disappears as spontaneously as it appeared, and consciousness, relieved of its physical limitation, no longer conscious of itself, merges in awareness. One is neither born nor does one die. Consciousness, in order to manifest itself, needs physical forms for its functioning and is constantly creating new forms and destroying old forms. If this is the natural process of the total functioning of consciousness, the question arises, how does the individual entity and its bondage come into existence? A brief answer, says Maharaj, would be to say that consciousness, limited by the confines of the physical form and not finding any other support, deludes itself into an identification with the particular body and thus creates a pseudo-entity. And this pseudo-entity, mistaking itself as the doer of the actions, which actually form part of the total spontaneous functioning of prajna, must accept the consequences and thereby subject itself to the bondage of cause and effect of the karma idea. The question of rebirth. Maharaj rejects the idea of rebirth and reincarnation out of hand. And the basis for such rejection is so simple that it humbles us. The entity which is supposed to be reborn does not exist except as a mere concept. How can a concept be reborn? Maharaj, in all innocence, asked the protagonist of rebirth, "Please, I want to know, who is it that would be reborn?" The body dies and after death is demolished, buried, cremated as quickly as possible. The body, in other words, has been irreparably, irretrievably, irrecoverably destroyed. That body, therefore, which was an objective thing, cannot be reborn. How then can anything non-objective like the life force, which on the death of the body merges with the air outside, or the consciousness which merged with the impersonal consciousness, be reborn either? Perhaps, says Maharaj, you will say that the entity concerned will be reborn, but that would be utterly ridiculous. You do not know that the entity is nothing but a concept, a hallucination which arises when consciousness mistakenly identifies itself with the particular form. How did the idea of rebirth arise at all? It was perhaps conceived as some sort of an acceptable working theory to satisfy the simpler people who were not intelligent enough to think beyond the parameters of the manifested world. The pseudo-entity. However, in order to see clearly how the pseudo-entity or the ego, who is supposed to be cause and object of supposed bondage, arises, it is necessary to understand the conceptual process for manifestation. What we are absolutely, nominally, is unicity, absolute subjectivity, without the slightest touch of objectivity. The only way that we are can manifest itself is through a process of duality, the start of which is the steering of consciousness, the sense of I am, the process of manifestation, objectivization, which was so far totally absent, entails a dichotomy into a subject that perceives and an object that is perceived, cognizer and the cognized. The nominal, pure subjectivity, must always remain the only subject. Therefore, the supposed cognizer and the supposed cognized are both objects in consciousness. This is the essential factor to be born in mind. It is only in consciousness that the process can occur. Every imaginable thing, every kind of phenomena that our senses perceive and our mind interprets is an appearance in our consciousness. Each of us exists only as an object, an appearance in someone else's consciousness. The cognizer and the cognized are both objects in consciousness, but, and this is the important point regarding the pseudo-entity, that which cognizes the object assumes that it is the subject of the cognition for other objects. In a world external to itself, and this cognizing subject regards its pseudo-subjectivity as constituting an independent, autonomous entity, a self with the power of volitional action. Understand the whole process of phenomenal manifestation, says Maharaj, not in bits and pieces, but in one flash of a perception. The absolute, the nominal, is the unmanifested aspect, and the phenomenon, the manifested aspect of what we are. They are not different. A crude simile would be the substance and its shadow, except that the manifested would be the shadow of the formless, unmanifested. The absolute nominum is intemporal, spaceless, not perceptible to the senses. The phenomena are time-bound, with a limited form and perceptible to the senses. Noumenon is what we are. Phenomena are what we appear to be as separate objects in consciousness. Identification of the unicity or the subject that we are with the separatedness in duality or the object that we appear to be constitutes bondage, and disidentification from this identification constitutes liberation. But both bondage and liberation are illusory because there is no such entity who is in bondage, wanting liberation. The entity is only a concept arising out of the identification of consciousness with an apparent object that is merely an appearance in consciousness. Life, a living dream. Once this is clearly perceived, it cannot but be understood that our idea of living our lives is a joke, because the idea of living our lives is based on the wrong belief that what we do are all acts of our volition. Who can exercise this volition when we have just perceived that there is no entity to exercise it? Living as such is really nothing other than the functioning of consciousness through the millions of physical forms, but mistaken for an individual life. Maharaj also explains that this basic perception comports the understanding that life is only a living dream. What really happens is that there is no perceiver as such, but only the perceiving of the conceptual objects moving in conceptual space, in conceptual duration. Are all these not clearly the aspects of the dream which we experience while asleep? When the dreamer wakes up, the dreaming ends, and the one who is awake is no longer concerned about the other entities in the dream. Similarly, in the living dream, the one who is awake, the one who realizes that nothing perceivable by the senses, including the entity one thinks one is, can be anything other than the mere appearance in consciousness, is no longer concerned about the other dream figures in the living dream. The awakened one realizes that he is the unconditioned absolute subjectivity on which the steering of consciousness started. This living dream spontaneously, without cause or reason, and just lives out the dream till, at the end of the allotted span, consciousness once again spontaneously merges in the absolute subjectivity. Spiritual practices, volition. Having followed Maharaj thus far, the reaction from most visitors is astonishingly similar. The question is asked, what you have said is very profound and I think I understand it intellectually, but what is it exactly that one should do in order to actually experience it? Maharaj sometimes hides his utter frustration, and at other times he flares up at this question. But his usual answer to the question is a counter question. Who is this one who thinks he must do something? And to achieve what? Once it is understood that an entity is merely an erroneous concept, that a body, like any other phenomenon, is merely an experience in consciousness, and that there is no one to exercise any volition, where is the question of anyone doing anything? Understanding, a perception, is all. To be thoroughly and totally impregnated by this perception is all the doing that is necessary for liberation, and no amount of doing will achieve it without the total annihilation of the erroneous concept of an independent entity with autonomy of action. The I cannot emerge without the annihilation of the me. When the me disappears, you are I. If the arrow has hit the target, as Maharaj says, there could not possibly be any more questions, but direct and intuitive perception of the facts. The flight of the arrow is made difficult by the interference of conceptualization by the intellect. Intellectual understanding is based on cause and effect. One of the aspects of the temporal dualism on which conceptualization is based, intuitional understanding, direct understanding, on the other hand, is intemporal, where cause and effect are one. It is intellectual understanding that leads to the question, if there is no autonomous entity to exercise any volition, how is non-volitional living accomplished? Or how is one supposed to live and act in the world? When such a question is asked, Maharaj's usual answer would be, it doesn't matter what you do, so long as you have truly understood what I'm talking about. In another way, it also does not matter if you have not understood what I'm talking about. Obviously, the point is that all our past experiences, if carefully analyzed, would clearly show that our lives, instead of being lived by us, as we seem to think, are in fact being lived for us, like all the characters in one's dream, and that, therefore, volition is really not a significant factor in our lives. A little thought would show us what an infinitesimally small part of our total physical or organic functioning depends on our volition. Maharaj asks, how long can you live without sleep, without food or water? How long can you go along without the excretory movements of the body? How long can you remain without breathing? Do you have the absolute volition to remain alive, even for the next 5 minutes? Did you exercise your volition when you were conceived, and when the conceived material grew in the mother's womb? When Maharaj tells us that it really does not matter what we do, he obviously wants us to comprehend that there cannot be any entity to exercise any effective volition, either doing or not doing. That what we take to be the result of our volition is only the inevitable, when it corresponds with what we consider to be agreeable to us at the time. We take pride in our volitional action and consider it as personal achievement. And when it is not, it becomes a matter of anger, unhappiness, and frustration for us. Indeed, says Maharaj, accepting the doership on the basis of volition of something that is part of the total functioning of consciousness is the chain that binds the phenomenal individual in apparent bondage. Apparent because there is no entity to be bound, and the realization of the very absurdity of the pseudo-subject trying to act independently of the pragya functioning is the awakening. Only such realization can lead to a perfect acceptance with equanimity of whatever events may occur until the duration of the lifespan is over. And while life is thus being lived, there would obviously be a definite sense of an all-enveloping unity, because the others would be perceived not as objects of a pseudo-subject, but as the manifested aspects of the same nominal subjectivity that one is. In other words, living would be free living, where neither the positive doing nor the negative non-doing of a pseudo-entity would prevail. Since in the absence of any intentions there is no volition, without conceptual intentions all actions would be spontaneous, the actor playing his part in this life play, or living one's living dream, taking life as it comes. Once there is an perception of that which is, says Maharaj, all life becomes what it has always been, Leela, an entertainment. When asked what he would do in a given set of circumstances, Maharaj has answered in absolute innocence, I do not know. This is exactly correct, because in what might seem to be identical circumstances on different occasions, his actions might be unpredictable, but on each occasion the action would be spontaneous. Maharaj often says that whatever is spontaneous is correct, because in the absence of conceptualizing, the spontaneous is natural and therefore correct without any reasoning, comparison, or any cause-effect. Listening to the words of the Guru gets top priority from Maharaj. He says that the quickest way towards self-realization although he makes it amply clear that there is really no way and no one to go anywhere, is listening, Shravan, reflecting, Manan, and meditating thereon, Nididhyasan. Even these words, Maharaj urges repeatedly, have to be used merely for communicating. And once the intention and meaning is grasped, the words, all words, must be thrown away in order to prevent intellect from raising conceptual structures thereon. Maharaj repeatedly asserts that his words are not addressed to any individual entity but to consciousness. Words arise from consciousness and are addressed to consciousness. It is consciousness which should listen to the words. And after the meaning is intuitively grasped, the words should be allowed to merge in consciousness. If the listening is done by an individual with the intention of getting some benefit with the aid of the intellect, Maharaj warns, all would be lost. Indeed, it is exactly the interference of the intellect that should be avoided. As has been made clear earlier, it is the emptiness of the pseudo-entity that must be apperceived. So long as it is an entity that is listening to words, how can the words achieve even the limited purpose of pointing in the right direction? The right direction being away from phenomenality, which is the source of both the entity and the words themselves. Words can throw up their deep and subtle meaning only if they are accepted intuitively without the interpretive interference of the intellect. Otherwise, the result would be a mere intellectual understanding of the world outside by an entity that keeps itself separate from what it understands to be illusory. You cannot, says Maharaj, take out a tiny bit of the total phenomenal manifestation as your separate self and at the same time understand that which is. It is only in the total annihilation of the pseudo-entity that true perception can take place. The magnificent fraud. Consciousness, says Maharaj, is the beguiling, bewitching Mahamaya, the most magnificent fraud ever. This enchanting sense of presence is only a sense, a concept, which comes upon the unmanifest absolute like an unwelcome guest who takes over the household so insidiously that the host is lulled into a sense of false security and well-being. Maharaj also calls it a temporary illness that produces delirium during its currency. This sense of being alive, being present, is so intoxicating that one is enchanted by the manifestation that it presents. One gets so involved in the spectacle that one rarely cares to find out if the spectacle really exists or is merely a vision, a hallucination, a dream, a mirage. One sees the tree and is so enchanted by it that one forgets that the tree is nothing other than the growth of the seed, which is the true source of it. The aim of Paramarth, Param Arth, the core meaning, is to seek the source, the seed. What is the seed of this manifestation? If you are not conscious, asks Maharaj, is there any manifestation at all of any kind? If you are not conscious, does the universe exist for you? It is only when you are conscious that the world is. And this consciousness is the source of all manifestation. Indeed, it is manifestation. There is a basic fundamental question at this stage. Who has come to this conclusion? Who else can it be but I? I, who am responsible for every kind of manifestation. I, who am every kind of manifested phenomenon. I, who was present 100 years ago. I, who was present before time was conceived. I, who am intemporality. I, who am awareness, not aware of itself. Because in that, my true state of wholeness, unicity, there is neither presence nor absence. absence of the presence of presence, absence of the presence of absence is what I am. And every sentient being can say this, not as himself, but as I. Do we need it all again briefly? Here it is. Number 1. Manifested existence is phenomenal, and phenomena being appearance sensorially cognizable and time-bound is a vision, a dream, a hallucination, and therefore untrue. Unmanifested existence is absolute, intemporal, spaceless, not aware of existing, sensorially not cognizable, eternal, therefore true. Who says this? Consciousness, of course, trying to cognize itself and not succeeding because cognizing. There is no cognizer as such. Cognizing cannot cognize that which itself is cognizing. An eye cannot see itself although it sees everything else. The seeker is the sought. This is the basic all-important truth. Number 2, I, unmanifested, am the total potentiality, the absolute absence of the known and the knowable, the absolute presence of the unknown and the unknowable. I, manifest, am the totality of all phenomena, totality of the known in the inconceivability of the unmanifested unknown. Number 3, there can be only I, the eternal I, totally unconditioned, without the slightest touch of any attribute, pure subjectivity. The mere thought of me is immediate and spontaneous, but illusory bondage. Let the me disappear, and immediately and spontaneously you are I. Number 4, phenomenally, me and you and he is only an appearance in consciousness. How can an appearance be in bondage? Nominally, how can I, pure subjectivity, need any liberation? Liberation is only being rid of the idea that there is anyone who needs liberation. Number 5, how is one to know if one is making progress spiritually? Could it be that the surest sign of progress is a lack of concern about progress and an absence of anxiety about liberation in the wake of clear apprehension, an instant perception of the total functioning of Nisarg, nature, in which there is no place for an autonomous entity. And here ends the Appendix 1, the core of the teaching. And here ends the book, Pointers from Nisargadatta Maharaj. This is the essence of the philosophy of Nisargadatta Maharaj. And as an attentive student of Advaita, you must have already seen that this is pure non-duality that Maharaj is speaking about. It is a filtered Advaita. Now those who are of the academic types may want to classify it in one of the specific branches of Advaita, but this is as direct as it can get. Yes, there are some loose ends here and there. For example, Maharaj remains at the level of the world and the body, does not go into any kind of metaphysics, and Balsekar has translated some of the Sanskrit words into English, and the most notable words are the I, the consciousness, and absolute awareness, and so on. And there are the Marathi words behind that, and that can be confusing. But let us not go into the words. You can associate the words with your own experience, into your own understanding, your seeing, and then throw away the words. Words are just like map, and the map is not the territory. So one of the problems people face while trying to comprehend a philosophy is that they get stuck at the words. Oh, look, he's talking about consciousness here, but that the consciousness depends on the body. But no, that is totally wrong. Consciousness is eternal. That is what my guru has taught me. And what is the mistake here? Balsekar has translated Chit as consciousness, perhaps, who knows. Although there is a glossary of Sanskrit words and their English interpretation in the Appendix 5, but if you don't even know the Sanskrit words, then it will be totally useless. So those who want to understand what Nisargadatta is saying may adopt the terminology here, try to see it without words. So it is, I can say that it is easier than reading directly an Advaita text from 1000 years or 2000 year old language, or even the Buddhist sutras, which have their own convoluted terminology. So for example, the Vijnana will be consciousness in Buddhism, and Vijnana will be translated as the mind in English. Now you can see that there is no mention of mind in the talks by Nisargadatta. Very barely he mentions, and when he says mind, it usually means the thinking part, the intelligent part, or the ego, that is the mind. But in Buddhism, well, it means consciousness. So it is very funny that the English translations can totally butcher the whole philosophy. So this comes to your rescue, because don't worry about the Sanskrit words. Don't worry about the interpretation. Like he said, that Maharaj was against talking from scriptures, and he used to come directly to the point. You are sitting there and I'm sitting here, now talk, now look. So this is the direct way of teaching. This is what I like most. If you open a book and start, parroting it, well, it's a waste of time. Many years will pass and you will know nothing but the book. So why am I reading the book then? The book is a pointer. You go straight to this kind of teaching. Get hold of a guru who is like this, who is very direct. The book is for those who don't have a guru. You don't need a book. You don't need a commentary on the book. You don't need meanings of the words. And that is how easy it is to know the truth. So I can see that approaching Nisargadatta directly can be very difficult task. And thanks to Balsekar, he has made it very, very clear in a very simple day-to-day language, which makes his philosophy very approachable. And immediately we can see that this is a refined form of Advaita. So after this, probably the other scriptures will start making sense to you. Probably after understanding what he says, you will be able to make head and tail of other scriptures. So even though this is not recommended for a beginner, and that is my opinion only, and who am I to say that you cannot start with Nisargadatta? But I tried once upon a time. It was to understand what he's saying. I read the I am that here and there, because when I opened it, it was all the same things written everywhere on all pages. So I said, well, it's not so good book. And it is very much like Raman Maharshi's question and answer sessions. So although I could not understand what he's saying, and Maharshi seemed more approachable, easier to understand, it was not limitation of the language, or not that Nisargadatta could not put it in proper words. It was not like that. He said, as you can see, he says it very, very clearly. The problem is the intellect. When the teaching is given through words, it is the intellect that engages with it first. And sometimes it remains there only. So that was the problem. And therefore, I also took the progressive path. That is what simple seekers, the ordinary seekers like us, need to take. There's nothing wrong in it. So if you think it is challenging to understand what he's saying, then read it again. I left so much of the book actually. Read the other one also. There are few more books by Balsekar and all. But it is only a guru who can cut this process into a 5-minute dialogue. That is all is needed. So you see, you can get the knowledge from the book. That is not impossible. but it takes time. It wastes time. So that is why people travel long distances, take all kinds of troubles, and sit with a guru. Anyhow, I hope that this reading of some portions of this book has benefited you in some way and will motivate you to enter the depths of Advaita.
Pure experiences.
You were listening to Pure Experiences by Tharun Pradhan.